So I think we're just about getting ready. Can everybody hear me? Everyone who can't hear me, raise your hand. So I'm Shawn Wildermuth. Some of you might know me by my appearances on daytime soap operas and morning shows. I like to do cooking shows. We're going to talk about Bootstrap. How many of you use Bootstrap already in some form? How many are still using Bootstrap 2? More than they would like you to, yeah. And so everyone else is using Bootstrap 3. Anyone actually using Bootstrap 4 yet? Sort of, yeah. I was the idiot who, my new blog site uses Bootstrap 4. Don't do that. So when I originally pitched this idea back in October or September to do a talk, I assumed by time NDC London and Sydney would happen that we'd be in beta or maybe even released. Alpha 3 came out about 4 days ago. So my one advice for everyone out there who's thinking about doing a talk, never do one on anything that's marked as an alpha. So we're going to have a little fun today, and hopefully it'll go well. Last time I did this talk, someone in the front row had to give me their USB stick because the feed to Bootstrap 4 failed during the talk. Yeah, that was a fun day. So we'll see how this goes. So let me talk a little bit about what Bootstrap is. If you're here, you probably know what I am. Bootstrap 4, if you lived through the Bootstrap 2 to 3 transition, you'll remember that it was incredibly painful. They took the sort of unpopular but probably right approach of renaming almost everything in the entire framework, which broke a lot of code. So a lot of people that were depending on templates in Bootstrap 2, actually a lot of people are staying with Bootstrap 2 because the pain to go to 3 was pretty high. The transition from 3 to 4 is nowhere near that big a change to us. Underneath the covers, they've decided to rewrite a bunch of things. So a lot of it is new code, but the classes in the CSS and all of the APIs, all the JavaScript APIs, are staying similar to what they were doing before. There's still going to be a step to convert, but the changes are much more evolutionary than revolutionary. So if you were like, I'm never going again because making that change was really painful, this isn't as painful. But we're going to talk about some of the things they've done and some of the things they took out and what they replaced it with to sort of see what that looks like. Oh, that's still me. So let's talk about what's changed in big pictures, and then we're going to go ahead and apply it to an actual web page. So a big thing they've done is this internal rewriting to go from less to Sass. So if you're using Bootstrap as the basis of your build of CSS, which a lot of people don't, they just use the generated CSS, but if you're using it to extend Bootstrap, you're going to need to move to Sass to make that change. And so for some organizations, that's quite a big change. The languages are similar enough that it's not that painful. Sass is a little bit more powerful, less is a little simpler. So if you have to make that transition, it actually isn't as painful as that sounds. And they've rewritten the JavaScript from scratch because, as we all know, JavaScript written about 5 years ago, if we go back and look at it now, we're embarrassed. We don't tell our children that's what we did. We pretend that we did PHP because that's less embarrassing. Oh, there's no PHP guys in here, right? And so their goal here was to make as little surface changes, but to really fix a lot of things they were unhappy with, performance-wise, maintainability, extendability, in the rewriting of the styling as well as the API. They've added support for AMD, so you can now load it on demand as you would want to, and that's really important. And they're adding optional Flexbox support. So Flexbox is a new way in Edge browsers to handle layout in a more logical way. Do any of you think CSS is logical? There's usually one liar in the back. So Flexbox is trying to address that. But they're only allowing you to opt into the Flexbox support because it limits the number of browsers it actually works on. So in order to maintain the compatibility with as many browsers, it's off by default, but you can opt into it. They're also improving the grid system. And the big thing with the grid system change, unlike the way it was between Bootstrap 2 and 3, is they're maintaining what they did before, but they're adding a new support for a new size, which is super big, which is Retina screens, really. They want to have that one extra, so the 1024 wide isn't the same as you're going to see in 2000 or 3000 or 4000 pixel wide displays anymore. And this is probably the one that hurts people the most, is wells, thumbnails, and panels are gone. They've been replaced with one component that really does the same thing the 3 ones did. It's called a card system. Has the same, it's pretty close to what the panels used to be, but they can be used standalone to get the functionality you saw in thumbnails and functionality you saw in wells before. So I actually think this is a good solution, but it does require some code change. And glyph icons are gone. This is one of those interesting things that I was kind of a fan of, in that glyph icons are fine. But we also went to Font Awesome or one of the other guys a couple years ago, so why they were sort of keeping both of them in the same box was not all that necessary. So they're simply saying, just here's how to use glyph icons, here's how to use Font Awesome or whomever you want to use for your icons. We're not in that business anymore. We're not there to suggest what kind of icons you want to use. Glyph icons was great when there wasn't anything else, right? We were all doing bitmap sprites and things like that back then. And they've dropped support for IE8. This is the one that also hurts a number of people, mostly in the enterprise space, because hopefully IE8 is dying out there actually on real, at least consumer machines. They're continuing to support Bootstrap 3 and will for the near future. So people who need that support are just suggested not to move to Bootstrap 4. That's really the advice there. So this is the most asked question. I'm on the Slack for Bootstrap. Bootstrap has a Slack if you want to talk to the team and mention things or work with some of the other guys on asking questions about how things work. It's a great place you can join for free. And this, whenever someone joins the Slack channel, they go to the v4 message window and they say, when will it be released? Right? I did it, because that's why I joined the Slack channel. I thought someone might know. So like I said, they just released Alpha 3, and if Angular 2 is an example, I think it's going to be done sometime in the 2018 or 19 timeframe, because we still got betas and 13 release candidates to go. My hope is that they'll get to beta soon and release soon afterwards, but they're trying to do it right instead of quick. And so one of the issues here is they're making changes now because they're still in alpha. They're not promising not to break changes right now. And so my blog, which is using Bootstrap 4, I'm on Alpha 2, and I'm probably not going to move to Alpha 3 because I just have to fix some things. And for now, it's just a blog, right? It's not a real web application. It's just a place where I can complain about anything I want to complain about, like Qantas Airlines. Well, we can take that offline. So what's happened in the world of Bootstrap is perplexing and interesting. And I think what happened was the cool job in software development used to be the game developer, right? Ooh, I want to work on the next X game or Y or whatever. And one of the things that they always liked was that they could say it's going to be done when it's done. And then people realized how lowly paid game developers were and overworked they were, so they all moved into JavaScript frameworks. And so the same guys are now doing this. It's going to be released when it's done, whenever we get done with it. So there is no answer here. So you're getting ready probably ahead of schedule. But I've heard people sort of whisper about maybe end of year, certainly beta by the end of the year. We'll see. I actually have a contract with Pluralsight to write a Bootstrap 4 course that I thought I was going to write in September of last year. So I'm I'm just waiting. So one of the big changes in 4 is the responsive breakpoints that I sort of mentioned that earlier. So I wanted to talk about that. Because Bootstrap 4, like 3, is a couple of the changes that are interesting here is, one, they've moved away from pixel sizes and gone to em and rem sizing instead. You're going to see that throughout all the CSS is ems and rems. Rems more than ems. And this is exactly where they break apart. And you'll see this larger column, this new XL size throughout the framework for different things it wants to do. Unfortunately, my laptop is only 19 by 80, so I can't really show you how these breakpoints work. But if you have a Retina screen, if you have an Apple product of some sort, it's pretty easy to see these breakpoints. And even though I'm showing them for columns, you're going to see these same sizes being used for a bunch of things. Like for instance, pull right doesn't exist anymore. It's now pull MD right, LG right, or XS right. They now have breakpoints at these different sizes as well, and you're going to see that throughout the framework. And the reason they pulled it out is saying pull XS for the extra small size right is the same as what we used to think of as pull right, right? It's the baseline pull it right unless I have an exception. Whereas if I say pull right MD, it's for MD and larger. And you're going to see that with buttons and font sizes, and everything is sort of correlated with the same naming conventions. And so one of the improvements they made that is going to affect you guys when you want to convert is that some of the naming conventions are gone. Like, I think it's table condense is now tabled SM, because it just makes more sense to be, is to keep the naming consistent across the product. So let's talk about the grid system. I'm going to start with a sample I have here. And this is one HTML page. This isn't a complex. Actually, let me make one change. Thought I had already done this. Sorry about this. So you can read it. I'm going to bring this down to about 720. So you can see it in the back. It's a big screen, but still. So here's my beautiful website I built. It's a single HTML page. I could be using layouts and doing all sorts of ASP-ness things that are awesome, but everything I'm talking about doesn't apply just to ASP.NET. It's to any web thing. And so this is going to be my new blog. If you like bacon, or any meat, really, I think you'll enjoy this. And of course, the problem with this is what it looks like on an iPhone, right? I've lost all this stuff, and I have the best thing I always want on a phone, which is scrolling left and right. I love that. If you decide to write a website, please let it scroll left or right, because it's so intuitive. So this doesn't have any sort of CSS that's designed to help me with structuring my site for different sized apps, or in a logical way. I'm using fixed widths and all sorts of things. So let's start by doing a couple of things. First, I'm going to take my CSS file, which isn't big, but it's pure CSS, and I'm just going to comment it out so you can see that we're going to start from really nothing. This is what my first 10 enterprise web applications look like, right? I had to change the font to serif, but other than that, to sans serif, but other than that, this is pretty much what every internal app I ever wrote looked like. So we're going to start from that point. So how do I get Bootstrap? There's a few different ways. They have a CDN for the latest version. They have a direct download. But instead of going against a specific version for development, I'm suggesting people just go straight to GitHub. So there's a GitHub link we can put here instead of a version number. So Bootstrap. And it's going to want to help me by saying 3.3 is the latest version, but I'm actually going to use Git. And let's just go out to GitHub so we can see what that looks like. because of course this is all open source, is there is a branch called v4 dev. That's the latest, may break you every day sort of branch. They do have specific endpoints if you want to stick at one of the alpha versions, but I like to play loose when I'm doing a talk, and hopefully they didn't break it again. So github.com, whoops. I always forget where it is here now. Is it that? v4 dev? Let's see if it loads it. I may have forgotten one level, as I often do. That's why I keep a cheat sheet. Yep, I forgot a level. That's sort of the easiest way to stay on the latest branch. Let's see if it actually loaded it. Nope. It's restoring. It should be there in a minute. Ooh, cool. And it brought in the other dependency for Tether as well, which is one of the libraries it uses that you can opt in or out of. But let's go over to my beautiful Bacon page, which happens to be an MVC view, but it doesn't have to be. And I'll do the trick of just including the dist, right? First the CSS. One thing you'll notice in Bootstrap 4, there's no more theme. So they're getting out of the business of giving you a default theme. The default theme is just what you get, and then you'll want to apply whatever theming and information on top of it. One of the things they're doing is they're opening a theme store. There's actually a couple already available for 4, so you can kind of see what they're doing, because they realized how much money everyone else was making on Bootstrap themes, and they weren't getting any of it to support their product. So that'll be whatever it is. And then, of course, we need the JavaScript. So when I usually introduce Bootstrap to people for the first time, and I add those two, they're awfully surprised. Whoops, here it went. They're awful surprised when it doesn't get that much better, right? We changed the font, woohoo, but it's, it's not magically fixed because we now have the CSS and the JavaScript included, because we're not really using it. And so let's start with the grid system. This site is really made up of, I'm making it a little small so we can see it, but it's really made up of a couple pieces. There's a header piece, a column piece that has information about Bacon, and then another column piece which is supposed to be sort of the right sidebar that's more Bacon information in case you're interested in, and then a footer that just includes some information. So there are these pieces, logical pieces of the UI that I want to be able to fit onto the page in a logical way. Whoops. So let's start by first coming to each of these pieces. So I have the nav element in the top, and I'm just going to add something called container. Now, there's still a container and a container fluid, and the difference between these is whether you want to be centered on the page or try to be stretched across the page. They don't really suggest the stretch across the page, but they're still leaving support in it. Because what tends to happen is the web, the magical internet, people want the sort of centered approach because it often makes more logical sense. But then in the enterprise, when they want it to be more of a, this is what our screen looks like, and I have a lot of information because this is a dashboard, they often want the fluid version. And so I'll repeat this with my editor inheritance on each of the 3 main sections, the header, the body, and ultimately the footer. And we're already looking a little better. I mean, not make it so small. Because at least we're now not taking, we're sort of centered on the page. And as we go to different sizes, that container is forcing us to be the width of the page. So even with as little as that one use of the container, at least we're no longer having to deal with that much scroll right. We're actually still scrolling right here because our images are too big, especially this one, which I think is actually chicken, not bacon, but meat is meat. Heresy, in fact. So the grid system says, I would like to separate the page into these logical units, these columns, as they were. A 12-column system, since most of you have used it, are going to do that. But what you're specifying in Bootstrap 4 especially is that you're going to go from this, that you're specifying how wide this should be within certain screen sizes. So let's take the naive approach, and I'm just going to do it with the center section, as I have two sections in that center section, the sidebar and the main section. And I'm going to wrap them in what Bootstrap calls a row. This isn't a new idea, but when you're going to use columns, they want you to be in a row. That way I can tell this first section with a class that I want a column for when it's medium and above. So when it's a standard size screen and above, I'd like this to be 9 logical units across. And when I first started doing this, it gets a little confusing because the larger the number, the more of these 12 it takes. In my mind, I kept on thinking that was like 1/9. I got it very backwards in my mind for a while, and I kept on changing numbers until it worked. And we'll do the same with the sidebar, or where I put the sidebar. But in this case, I want to say 3 because we're dealing with a grid of 12, and so often you want to make them equal 12 at the end of the day. So if you want 3 across, they're going to be column 4s. If they're 4 across, you're going to have column 3s, etc. And so we now have that idea of a sidebar and a main bar, of a main section and a sidebar. And what's interesting is the default from Bootstrap 3 to 4 has stayed the same, in that if you are dealing with medium or above, it assumes you want to stack them when you get to small and extra small devices. You can override that, but the behavior is that they're not going to be side by side. They're only going to be side by side for larger screens. So let me go to the top so you can kind of see this work. So as we're going from small tablet, we're going to eventually hit small sort of desktop size, and that's where the medium hits. And then we're going to hit larger. This is where large hits, and then I can't really actually get to extra large. So it has these ideas. Actually, I think I just barely get extra large in here. And the idea behind columns, I know a lot of you already know this, but I'm going to cover it anyway, is if I want different formulations for different size screens, I'm going to add more classes. So if I want to go small and make this 6 across, and I'll make this 6 as well, again, trying to achieve the 12. Then on this screen, it stays 9 until I start to make it small. Whoops. And I'm going to hit that small section there. So now it's side by side because 2 even columns. And then once we get to extra small, it's going to go back to the stacking them because obviously, but I could override that with these different ideas. And so the grid system is about the same. The place where this really starts to change in Bootstrap 4 are offsets. So if we wanted to push this out by saying, I want to offset this, leave some white space, and then start it. Let's say I want to make the sidebar 1. Whoops, that's not the right word. Key. If I want to make it 1 wide, I might want to push it over by a couple of columns before I had the column, because by default, it's going to put them all next to each other. And so what we used to do is have to write this lovely class name, column offset, whoops, medium 2 to push it over by 2, right? And all they said is, if you want an offset, you know it's already a column. So they've changed the names to no longer include the column. I'm not sure that the 4-character savings was a big deal, but someone really was passionate about it and won that fight. Oh, I said medium, didn't I? Well, it's not showing for some reason. But you'll have to trust me. I think it might be medium dash offset. Say again? Oh, save the file. That's a formidable question. There we go. Thank you. The one thing I always forget about, saving the file. So let's go back and talk about the next interesting piece. And that's not where I wanted to be. Cards. I talked about briefly earlier that cards were this idea of replacing wells and panels and thumbnails. So the idea behind cards is that it's a new component, a new thing you're going to use, replaces these three, and they want it to be more flexible. So they want it to be extendable and sort of this one thing that could handle most of them. So let's turn a piece of our page into cards. I'm going to get rid of the offset because it doesn't make much sense to show you this demo. And I'm just going to take this little piece of our code, and I'm just going to put it in a class called card. I've got a paragraph, I've got an image. Oh, actually, before we do the card, one change I forgot I wanted to show you that does affect you is images. So we used to have an image called responsive that we used everywhere. We probably even injected it in our database so that we had it. And so this is one of the more painful ones, is there to alleviate some naming irregularities, they're calling it fluid, because they have fluid in the name for things that are handled. And so if we change these three, whoops. Come on, there you go. I used to be able to type in front of people. It's like pair programming with 30 of your closest friends. And this gets rid of all of our normal right to left scrolling, because it finally makes this giant image always fit into the columns they're in. That's fluid. Fluid or responsive takes an image and makes sure it fits in the container it's in effectively. These aren't getting any smaller or bigger because they're not bigger than the frame they're in. But if they were bigger, they would make sure and shrink it to that size. So let's take this piece and let's create a card. And what we're going to see over here is that you're getting sort of the minimal, it's a little hard to see in the back because it's actually gray by default, this little well. But the well has this idea of a body, which you can actually put right here on the card as well. I'm sorry, not body, called block. And then it actually looks more like the wells you're used to. So a card and card block is giving you kind of the same functionality that we used to get with a simple well. To make this more like a panel, we can surround these with card block and then use other decorators for things like card text to give you that same behavior. But the reason why you would want to break it out in this way is because we can add headers and footers. So let's add a header and a footer real quick. Card header. Card title. Oh, I forgot. I don't need the block. Once you're using headers and bodies, you don't need the block. So let me come back here and get rid of that. I always forget the order of these, right? You're getting more of that panel-like experience. And just like that, we can still color these with card, let's say, success. Right? So we're getting some of that same behavior that we saw before. Let's go ahead and add a couple of things. We're going to do a quick card subtitle. And then finally surround this all with a card body. I'm sorry, card block. So we're starting to get that sort of flow of these rectangular sections. And I'll go ahead and make a footer as well, just so you have a little bit of all the pieces. We're getting that. And last thing is we can go ahead and say card inverse when we have a dark background. So there's these little helper classes to sort of build these cards in your system. You can use as much or as little. They're trying to get away from what they've done before, which is, to make this work, we're going to need 34 nested divs, and this is exactly what it looks like, and if you're missing one, it's all going to fall apart. And they've done a lot of this by getting rid of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The opposite of ancestor, the child CSS flag. They're allowing anything to be the straight. Yes, thank you. So cards are pretty simple once you sort of see each of the pieces, but it does mean every panel well and thumbnail you were using will need to be converted over. Most of the names are pretty conventional with what you were using before, so it's a pretty in-place change. So navigation, the nav element, they've been simplified. This is an interesting notion because whenever I do about Bootstrap site, I would start my site, I'd drag Bootstrap over, and then I would go to bootstrap.com or getbootstrap.com, and I would go find the nav example and I would copy it into my project because there was nothing intuitive about the way that the nav stuff was put together. It looked right, it worked right, but I really could never remember exactly how it went along. And it's still complicated enough that I still have a little hard time remembering it, but it's a lot more logical than it used to be. So let's convert our beautiful navigation into the new nav element. Oh yeah, and responsive menus actually make more sense and are easier to put together than they used to be. So go over to the code. And I told the client that this is what all websites look for navigation, but he seemed to think that something better than what this looks like is what he wanted. So we're going to start by moving this. We can actually leave the container there. Is adding navbar to our section, navbar.nav, to tell it that we want it to be that this whole element is going to be the nav of a navbar. And we're going to go to the Bacon is Love piece and add navbar.brand. So they've renamed a lot of the classes to be navbar prefix instead of some of them being nav and some of them being navbar. Some of them are still a little confusing and wonky, but you can know that if you start it with navbar, you're going to be pretty close. So we're going to get closer. So the brand is showing the way it should, but our little menu still looks like a unordered list because it is an unordered list. And one of the notions here is that they were using the unordered list as the sort of structure for it. And they're now saying you can, it's fine, but you don't need it anymore. So I'm actually going to go and just change this, simplify it by getting rid of all the listiness of it. Because part of what using a list meant was there had to be rules to make it not display like a list. And so if you don't use the unordered list, it actually becomes a little simpler because it's really just a list of links, and they can style that in the way they need to. Makes more sense and is honestly just a little simpler. Oh, before we do the nav bar, let's talk about something. I'll come back to that in just a moment, I promise. So one of the things that we used to get with the nav bar is sort of this coloring of the nav bar, right? By default, it's not really doing any coloring, but we could add nav bar dark, for instance, and there's a dark and a light. That's probably not what we were looking for, right? And the reason is they want to separate this notion of the dark and the light being just for really the text colors and what is the background color. So there's now a BG colors. So I could say fuchsia if I was building this for my wife, and for some reason it's not showing. That's odd. Did I forget to save it again? Huh. Okay, let me go to my cheat sheet. I must have screwed something up. That's all that. Let's try it this way, inverse. Because that's what I told it to do. Okay. I'm not sure why the colors aren't working. It may be in the build we have, it's broken. So we have it as dark. And if we go back and tell it that I want navbar dark, ironically, it changes the text to white, right? But what I like about this approach is that I no longer need to be building classes for one-off. So inverse might not be what I want. I might just want to do as I know evil as some of you are going to say it is. But you could do this with a class as well. Right? I could just create a background color. And unlike before, it's not going to try to override it. So by default, it doesn't have a background color associated with it. It's only applied afterwards. And whether that's with a class that's built in, a class you build, or even in line. And so they're trying to treat that, because one of the things that happened with Bootstrap 3 was it was so successful that every website looked like a Bootstrap 3 example page, right? Or the bootstrapification of the web. And they're really trying to make it as much in a way that this just doesn't happen. It's still going to happen because some of the idioms don't have, some companies don't have designers behind all this, and they're just going to try to get it working, especially inside enterprises, but it's still helpful. So let's go back to the menu. How did I get 2 IntelliSenses at once? That is sexy. And if I remember right, that's oh yeah, we don't need anything there. So another things I liked is the container no longer needs anything, but we do need a class on each item, which is nav item and optionally nav link. So if it's an actual link and not just a button that's containing other things, you would just have nav item. If it's a link itself, you'll include both. You may not need both if my memory is incorrect. You may just need link, but I'm going to do both because I know that works right now. And so we now have, our background isn't really helping us, but we have actual sort of buttons. And so let's take this and do what everybody does, which is pull right, right? Pull right, that should work. So you'll see here that it's now implying pull LG right, because all the rights and the pull rights and pull lefts are now by size. So if you want the behavior of always to the right, you're going to actually want pull excess right. Because this is a mobile-first framework, so everything is applied from the bottom up. Woohoo! Let's make that a less offensive color. I don't know if that's less offensive, but it'll do. The same idea with navbar, fixed top and bottom continue to work, but you still need to manually push your content down. Because it doesn't know what size you want your header. There isn't a default of body top down 50 once you apply this, and getting that to actually work gets a little weird. So I'll go ahead and add this as the only piece of styling we actually need. Body, margin, top, 50. I probably should use an EM or a REM, but I'll get away with it because I'm not a very good developer. So we have the beginnings of our nav bar, or not the beginnings. We have the non-mobile-friendly nav bar, because as we get smaller, at some point we're going to get that. We're going to run into it, which is why in smaller devices we tend to have pop-out menus or pop-in menus. And they're not getting into the business of fly-in menus or any of that. There's plenty of ways to do that, and these menus aren't difficult to implement that way. But there's nothing built into Bootstrap 4 that you can say, fly in from the right-hand side of the screen or any of that sort of magic. It's actually only a few lines of CSS to make it happen, so it's not that big a deal. But we do need the ability to change this to add a new element. So let's start first with the magic button, right? You like to have a button with the, let's see if I remember right, 9976. Is that right? Ooh, it's an unstyled, ugly button, but it's the hamburger menu, right? It's just a default hamburger menu. The old examples used to use that lovely 3 dashes on top of each other mess. So the Unicode usually works. You can, of course, replace this with any icon you want, certainly with Font Awesome, as we'll show you later. So let's make it into a button. Let's say, I'll just do a primary button. It's ugly, but it'll work. But we now need to actually make it do the job, right? And so there's a few pieces here. First, we want to say nav, what is it called again? Toggler. Navbar toggle. Nope, toggler. And there's different ones for different sizes if you want as well. But toggler tells it that it's the type that's going to toggle the menu. And then down here, I'm going to want to give it an ID, because we want to know what to toggle. And I'll use my awesome name, the menu, and data toggle collapse, and data target equals pound the menu, right? So this is effectively these helper attributes saying this is the thing that toggles it, this is what it's going to toggle, which is a collapse class, and then this is what the actual thing to toggle. And so the last thing we'll need, if I remember right, is collapse here as well. So will it work? Oh, I think I need actually collapse. Well, I'll leave it there for now. Nope, I was right the first time. Oh, I put it on the wrong element. Like I said, it's still not perfect. Well, that's not working. I'm now collapsing in every case. Let's try it one more time. So we have our menu. We have our button that's collapsed. But as we get smaller, hopefully, come on, you can do it. Nope. You guys remember when I could remember things? Because I do not. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that was all right. And I forgot about navbar. Toggleable, let's say small. Going to do what I should have done earlier, which is, this should be the one. Just so I don't waste any more time remembering what class I forgot. I'm going to prove to you that it works. And then we'll go on before we run out of time. Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Happy? Really? Sorry about this. Oh, I know. I'll just do this. So there it is, and when we make it smaller, you're seeing a preview of what else we're going to build. We've got it, and it shows up as we toggle. None of that's with writing any JavaScript. It's all by specifying these class names and the attributes, and it will work. And I'll make this work before I post it up on my site later, so you'll be able to get the completed version. Sorry about that. So custom form controls. Form controls are an interesting one. We started at what? 40, right? Yeah, okay. Form controls are an interesting one because they've always had sort of a strength of building forms in a rich way, and that really hasn't changed. But there are certain controls that just haven't looked consistent across browsers. So checkboxes, radio buttons, selects and drop-downs, and the file browser control. And so they've decided to do two things. One is we're going to build a way that if you want to opt into it, you can use a control that's going to look the same across browser. We're going to do sort of the owner-drawed version of these controls because we know that this is a common thing. And a lot of people go outside of Bootstrap to go get these controls. But they also decided, if we're going to do it, let's make it so it's an extendable way to write controls. And so they've built up a way to have sort of the base class and base styling, and then being able to supply the drawing mechanic of how they're going to replace it on the screen. Now, all this is drawn with CSS, but it's drawn by replacing the original element, drawing a new element in its place, and that whole sort of trick. Until we get actual composition in HTML, where we can actually have a component that's made up of other components. They'll probably go to that. But for now, this is sort of a good fix. So let's start by sort of proving that forms haven't changed a lot. So I have this little form at the bottom. And I'll do what we all have to do, which is add class form group to each little grouping. I'll do the same here. I think that's the last one. Oh, I'll put it on the input as well. And this should make this form a lot prettier. Oh, no, it didn't. I forgot. We need to do the other piece, which is to make all the controls form control. Except for the text box, because that makes the text box look weird, right? It used to be a lot more fun. I think that's all of them. So we now have a form. Looks fine. I haven't styled the button. I could go ahead and style the send button as well. And we have the Firefox looking drop down and the Firefox looking checkbox, right? These are really consistent, the inputs, but the checkboxes, and in this case a select, is different depending on the browser you're on. And this especially gets weird when you get into mobile browsers, because we all know we still have Android 2.2 users that sometimes visit our websites. And we want to hate them, but we're going to try not to hate on them too much. So let's start with the checkbox. There's a new class called CB. It's not CB, is it? They may have changed it. Give me just a second. Oh, yeah. That's for the checkbox. We have the checkbox, and that is summarily the thing you're going to program against. And in its place for checkbox, this is a little simpler for select, but for checkbox, you're actually going to create a span of class indicator. Where did you go? Is it custom control indicator? Did they change that already? No, it should be custom indicator. Let's see if it works. This may be one of the places where they're still changing it. Because the label also needs a custom control. I believe it's indicator. It might be just a custom input. There it went. Let's see if it actually worked. Did I save it? I said I saved it, but it didn't change the look. They may be one that's changed since. Let's see. See if that actually works for us. Nope. Well, thank you. I ran through this the other day. Maybe they've changed it really recently. Let's try with the select, because that to me is the more interesting one anyway. And also the simpler one, because there's fewer pieces. So they've changed this, so this is the exact look it'll look regardless of the browser you're on, because they're owner drawing it as well. Does that make sense? But this idea of custom control and custom type of control is something that they welcome you or want you to extend into your own type of control. So if you have custom sort of things, they want to provide sort of a framework to start. Because in order to make this work, it's a set of CSS, but it's also a set of JavaScript that's looking for those selectors to do the magic of when someone opens it, show the items. When someone selects, change the underlying select so that your programming will still be against the underlying objects. But if you looked at this in the debugger, you'll actually see the select has been hidden, and then there's this other piece that is all the drawing mechanism in its place. And so it's doing the job of communicating between what the user sees and what you're programming against. And let's talk about the last few changes. So font, glyph icons are gone. Use your favorite font. I'll actually show you that in a second. We'll talk about figures, and we'll talk about progress bars. So these are the last 3 important changes. Let's start with Font Awesome, because it's awesome, and it's full of fonts. OK, maybe one font. How many of you already use one of these, Font Awesome or one or the other? Most of you. So this won't be new for most of you. And I'm just going to use this in one place so you can see instead of the default, you're going to just want to include Font Awesome in the project first, which I forgot to do. And then I can go ahead and use that magic. I still want to know why they used I. Guess icon instead of italic, but whatever. Font Awesome, Font Awesome. What was it called? Cutlery. There's a lot of fonts in there, so. Say again? Oh, I screwed it up. Thank you. Ooh, we now have Bacon is Love over here, and we still don't have that quite working. I'll fix that before we get to it. But you can at least see the font is being used, and that's how you would use it instead of the glyph icons. It's not that the glyph icons are better. I stopped using glyph icons because their class names were so long. I just got sick of typing glyph icons dash blah blah dash blah 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 blah. That alone was worth it. So let's talk about progress bars real quick. Actually, let's talk about figures. So if I want to have image figures, there's a new distributed cache. There's a new convention called a figure, a new element called a figure. And on its own, it's not doing a lot in changing the way it looks. So let's refresh this and go back up top. Which one did I do? The second one, yeah. So this is now a figure, and you can see it's not really doing anything different. What's interesting is that you can now, inside this container, have a figure caption. Right? And that's not that big a deal. It's just a little sort of decorated one, but it knows about the container so that if you decided to pull, let's say, extra small right, it's going to stay in the container. It's really attached to it. So needing to annotate figures, it's just a little nicety that I'm glad they put in, because I've had to do that a lot by writing my own classes. And finally, the very sexy progress bar. I love the idea of a progress bar because the nature of the web is that every time we show a progress bar, it's really not accurate, right? We're just guessing or moving it. We're trying to distract. It's like we're taking pictures of toddlers, right? Look at the bouncing ball, trying to get them to pay attention to someplace. So the big difference here is it's no longer this convoluted structure. It's, oh, HTML has a progress. Let's use it now that more browsers have implemented it. So the standard attributes are now being tolerated. Max and data? State? No. Value. There we go. Let's say 50. So on its own, the unstyled progress bar, if I press save, whoops. Really? Oh, you know it's too far up now that that header's too big. Sorry. Let me just take the fix top off for a minute because of my stupid thing not working. There's our lovely default. Oh, there's our checkbox. There's the bug. That's why it wasn't working. There's our beautiful progress bar as default in whatever browser and such. And again, to make it look the same in all browsers, you can now just add classes called progress. And there's some other progress sort of bars. So I'll do progress bar striped and progress bar, let's say animated. Really? I think I have the old one in there. Striped. And progress, let's say, warning. That's better. So we're going to get that same sort of being able to style it in some standard ways. But instead of that, I think it was 3 divs nested amongst each other in order to do it in the old version, having to actually be able to use progress bar, and it used the HTML actual values instead of having invented their own. So I think the big takeaway is, if you think Bootstrap 4 is going to be important to you, this is a good time to sort of poke around and look at it, but not to adopt it. It's not. I'm not sure whether I would adopt it at beta, but they've been pretty good of when they get to beta, they're going to stop breaking the APIs. They're still making changes. They're still getting rid of and adding different pieces, small pieces, but pieces. So it's still pretty early for this stuff. There's a link to the docs for V4 already. They're pretty comprehensive. For alpha docs, I'm pretty impressed. There's the blog announcing the first alpha that was back in, August. Isn't it August now? Last year, August. And there will be a Bootstrap 4 course on Pluralsight as soon as they get off their duffs and finish it. Because Twitter isn't doing a lot of work right now. They could easily just write a new framework, right? Any questions? Here? I don't know. I know that, so the question was, the controls have been reworked, has the accessibility been improved? And I don't know because I haven't really dug in and tested that. I know that it's on their list of things that they're improving, but I haven't looked at to what extent. That'd be a good question for them on the Slack channel. Say again? Probably. Other questions? The which? Yes, yeah. The validation markup really hasn't changed, and you can still style them away from what they're doing, but they really haven't done anything different there. No. Say again? Fitter? Oh, footer. No, not really. So the question was, did the footer change any? And not that I could discernibly tell. The same classes to stick it to the bottom or to have it float are still there, and they just seem to work like they always have. So I don't believe so. They have done some improvements in grouping and some of the pills and tabs that are visibly, they don't pop in and out as much as they used to when you're changing screen size and some things like that. So there's been some improvements. Animations have been primarily moved to CSS versus JavaScript animations and things like that. So there is some performance increase in 4 as well. But until they optimize it and ship it, who knows? Other questions? Yeah. So the question was whether things like Angular material that doesn't play well with Bootstrap, been any talk about the groups talking to each other. And traditionally, since Google and Twitter are really good friends, I don't think so. I haven't heard of anything, but I haven't been in the know on that. That would be something that they could probably answer you on the Slack channel way better than I could, to be honest with you. Other questions, or are you in for cookies? Who's in for cookies? Well, thank you very much. I'll be up here if you have some questions, and thanks for coming. Don't forget to vote.